Hey, welcome back. Today, we're talking about something that could quietly reshape daily life for millions of people across the country. It's President Trump's 2026 federal budget proposal. And while it's been making waves in the news, many of the real-world impacts are still flying under the radar. From education to healthcare to housing. This plan proposes some of the biggest federal spending cuts we've seen in decades, with some programs potentially disappearing altogether. And what's being added instead might surprise you. If you've ever wondered what happens when a government decides to shrink its footprint this drastically, or if you're concerned about how this could affect your community, your job, or your wallet, stick around. The details matter more than ever. Before we jump in, let me know in the comments if you've personally relied on any federal programs like Section 8, student aid, or public health services. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this kind of breakdown helps you stay informed, take a second to subscribe for more content like this. So let's start at the top. The proposed budget cuts $163 billion from what's called non-defense discretionary spending. That's a broad term, but basically it covers most of the things people interact with outside of Social Security and Medicare. Think education, housing, science, health, the arts, and foreign aid. Almost every federal agency outside of defense is on the chopping block in some way. And at the same time, there's a huge boost in spending for the military and immigration enforcement. The Pentagon would get a 13% increase, pushing the defense budget to a record $1 trillion. That's on top of another $175 billion going toward border enforcement, including the wall, deportations, and expanding detention space. You can see where the money's being shifted from domestic services to national defense and border control. Now, let's talk about education. The Department of Education is facing a 15% cut, about $12 billion. That's going to hit programs that support students who are already at a disadvantage. Programs like TRIO and Gear Up, which help first-generation college students, would be slashed. Federal work-study programs, funding for English learners, and adult education would also take a big hit. Even though some funding for special education in Title I is being preserved, the rest of the support systems around them are being gutted. And here's something not everyone sees coming. Grant for Disadvantaged K-12 schools would be eliminated. The administration wants states to get block grants instead, which sounds flexible, but the concern is that without federal oversight, that money may not actually make it to the communities that need it most. And this isn't just about classrooms and textbooks. When you cut funding like this, it ripples out into neighborhoods, into teacher staffing, after-school programs, college readiness. These are the types of cuts that can widen the gap between well-funded districts and schools that are already struggling to keep the lights on. Now, you might be thinking, what about things like the arts or scientific research? Areas we don't always hear about, but still matter? Those too are in the crosshairs. The National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services would be eliminated entirely. That means local libraries, small-town museums, and arts nonprofits, many of which already run on shoestring budgets, could be forced to shut their doors or scale back dramatically. And the National Science Foundation, that's seeing a 56% cut. Whole categories of research, especially in the social sciences, would be wiped out. NASA isn't spared either. Major programs like Artemis and the Orion capsule are being canceled in favor of private Mars missions, which many see as benefiting companies like SpaceX rather than the public as a whole. Also, what does this mean for health? Well, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention would lose half its budget. That includes closing down the National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention, which funds programs for diabetes, heart disease, and smoking cessation. These are the programs that keep people healthy before they ever end up in an emergency room. Once you take that away, it's harder and often more expensive to deal with these issues down the line. The National Institutes of Health is also looking at an $18 billion cut. Several institutes would be eliminated altogether. Research related to gender identity and racial health disparities would no longer be funded under this proposal, which is already raising major ethical and public health concerns. Now let's talk environment. If you care about clean air, safe drinking water, or even just weather forecasting, this next part might be frustrating. The Environmental Protection Agency is facing a 54.5% cut. That includes pulling back on environmental justice grants and eliminating cleanup funds for contaminated communities. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, would lose about a quarter of its funding. Climate satellites, the ones that help us track long-term changes in weather and climate, will be scaled down or cut entirely. The administration argues these cuts are about removing radical environmental alarmism, but it also means we'll have less information to prepare for climate-related disasters. And that brings us to housing. One of the biggest cuts in the budget is to federal rental assistance. Over $26 billion gone. That includes big changes to Section 8 vouchers, which millions of low-income Americans use to pay rent. Under the new plan, states would have to build their own rental systems, and assistance will be capped at 2 years for able-bodied adults. That sounds like a small tweak, but in practice, it could leave a lot of families with nowhere to go after that time is up. Affordable housing development programs would also be eliminated. So would community development block grants, the ones used to build parks, repair sidewalks, and support local businesses in underserved areas. It's not just housing that's affected. It's the whole fabric of neighborhood support. Programs that help the elderly and disabled, like heating and cooling assistance, are being cut too. For many seniors, that's the difference between being safe in a heat wave or winter storm or not. These aren't flashy programs, but they've been quietly helping people stay in their homes and stay healthy for years. Foreign aid is also being slashed. The State Department would lose 84% of its funding. That means less money for humanitarian relief, fewer educational exchanges like Fulbright, and no more economic assistance to developing countries. These cuts also affect America's role abroad. Critics say it signals a retreat from global leadership, giving other countries like China more influence in regions where the U.S. once led. So then, why is this all happening? Supporters of the budget say the goal is to cut waste, fight ideological overreach in government, and get serious about the national debt, which now stands at over $36 trillion. They argue that we can't keep funding every program forever and that it's time for a leaner, more focused government that puts national security first. But critics see something very different. They say this budget isn't just about money, it's about values. What gets cut and what gets funded tells a story about priorities. And in this case, the story seems to be that public services, education, housing, and healthcare are being traded for military expansion and stricter border enforcement. Some lawmakers, even within Trump's own party, are pushing back. They're calling out specific cuts, saying they go too far. Senator Susan Collins has criticized the energy assistance cuts. Senator Roger Wicker says the defense budget isn't actually keeping pace with inflation. And Mitch McConnell has gone so far as to accuse the White House of playing budget gimmicks. So then, what does this all mean for you? If you work in public health, education, research, housing, or the arts, these proposals could directly impact your job, your funding, or your organization's ability to operate. If you rely on rental assistance, student aid, or local health clinics, you could see more hurdles, longer wait lists, or even closures. And even if you don't use these services directly, these cuts could affect your community. Fewer after-school programs, fewer cleanups in polluted neighborhoods, and less support for the elderly or disabled. That can lead to ripple effects like increased homelessness, reduced school outcomes, and higher local healthcare costs. Now, all of this is still a proposal. Congress holds the purse strings, and negotiations are already underway. But even if only a portion of these cuts make it through, it would still represent a major shift in how the federal government serves the public. And it's not just about saving money. It's about deciding what kind of support people should be able to expect from their government, and what happens when that support disappears. So I'm curious, what do you think about this approach? Do you think the government is trying to do too much or not enough? And are there cuts you actually agree with? Let me know down in the comments. And I know a lot of people here share your same concerns. If you found this helpful or learned something new today, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who might be affected by the changes. The more informed we are, the better decisions we can make and the better questions we can ask. Thanks for spending this time with me, and take care until next time.